Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Not bad. How about you?
I'm all right, thanks. It's so great to see you here again at NodeConf.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back. I know a few people were talking about how many they've been at before, and I don't know how many it's been. Feels like 5 or 6 to me. So, but it's nice to be back again this year.
Yeah, I remember the Falcons on my first NodeConf as well. It was an absolutely amazing experience doing falconry. So it was lovely to be reminded of that in your video just now. I understand that since last time we met, you've been working on some node hydroponics. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, so part of my hobbies is like playing around with a little bit of IoT type stuff and actually like just 3D printing stuff. And what's great is to be able to bring like all those hobbies together. So one of my latest hobbies is growing some tomatoes and peppers and lettuce and stuff like that to have a healthy lunch every day. And I'm starting to, as I get more into that and building up bigger and bigger plants, it gets harder and harder to water them. So I'm now working on a setup where I'm going to be able to control the pumps and the lights and all that kind of stuff with a Node.js app and sort of keep track of how much water they're drinking and all that. And just another interesting way to use Node and MQTT and IoT all together to do something fun.
That sounds really awesome. And you're going to monitor the outdoor weather to see if the rainfall is going to affect your hydroponics, or are they all internal?
They're all in the basement. My wife says that things are taken over, but it's not so big. It's only like 6 by 6 or something like that. So it's not a huge area.
No, it's not a big allotment, really. Not if you're trying to eat healthily, and this is what you're eating.
That's right.
So. You're going to tell us about what's next for Node.js. So I'm going to hand over to you because I'm very interested to hear that. So Michael Dawson with Node.js, what is next?
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about Node.js, what's next. A little bit about myself before I get started. I'm Michael Dawson, the Node.js lead for Red Hat and IBM. What that means is I get to be a real active community member. I'm a collaborator, member of the technical steering committee, as well as very active in a number of the working groups, helping to lead or being a participant. Also continuing our involvement in the OpenSSL Foundation, which we see as a great place for like neutral collaboration across the JavaScript ecosystem. And I'm currently acting as the sort of community director representing a number of the projects. If you want to catch up with me or have any questions on my talk or anything else, there's some of my information. You can follow me on Twitter or reach out to me on LinkedIn or through email. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up of what I'm going to cover, I'm going to first give you a little bit of idea of how you could follow what's next yourself, because it's always nice to know what's going on between now and the next time you might see a talk on that. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I think is a key effort, which we've called the Next 10 effort. And then finally, I'll follow that up with what's new and interesting. We all know that Node 17 is coming tomorrow, but I think there's also interesting things coming with the promotion of Node 16 to LTS the following week. And just that, we have a bunch of interesting stuff that's come in over the last 6 months to a year. So first of all, how can we keep on top of what's going on in the Node project? If you look at the right, I borrowed this picture from one of Bethany's slide that she put together a while before. The Node project is a very busy place, and it's quite a lot like this roundabout where everybody is sort of going on their way, and we intersect, and we have to work together to make sure that things sort of don't collide. But there's a lot going on, and it can seem like it's a hard way to follow things. The first place, and the great thing about the Node project is it works in a really transparent manner. So you can actually see all the conversations. They're in GitHub. We record our meetings so you can watch meetings. Most of the meetings are open, so you could actually join the meetings. So you can actually, follow all of the information, all the discussions that's going on. And, the first way to do that is through GitHub notifications. The downside to GitHub notifications is that this shows a really unrealistic view of my inbox. This is right after I've gone through and pretty much read them all. but there's a lot of notifications. You can see the little thing at the top saying, hey, overwhelmed by notifications. That's because, after a few days, I have several hundred. And after a week, if I go on holiday or something like that, I can come back and there can easily be 1,000 notifications to catch up on. So the GitHub notifications are a great way to sort of keep on top of everything. And I really do try and go through and read everything that's going on, because it's a great way to catch up on things. But it does take a lot of work, so I wouldn't recommend that for everybody. My next recommended way of doing that is to keep track of the working groups and teams. So those are on the Node.js calendar. So if you ever wonder when a team meeting or a working group meeting is happening, you can go to the calendar. The week of the meeting, there'll be an issue generated in the repo generally, and you can find the details, how to join. And this is a good way to find a topic that your area. For example, are you interested in building infrastructure? Are you interested in releases? Are you interested in the challenges that package maintainers face? Are you interested in Dici? There's all sorts of different areas, and if you can find the working groups or teams that align with your interests, it's a great way to meet other like-minded people, follow what's going on, and get involved. So that's another good way that I think keeping up to date that you should take a look at. The next areas are strategic initiatives. The TSC has a number of strategic initiatives, and those are documented in the link that I had on the previous page. And again, that's another way where, in addition to those teams and working groups, you can see what's going on and what we think is important, and perhaps get involved in some of those initiatives. In fact, since then, we've added a link for the Core Promise APIs ones. So this is a good way to go and say, oh, okay, well, here's some of the strategic initiatives that are going on, and watch some of the progress that's happening there. I'll talk about Next 10. So I have a whole bunch of slides, so I won't talk about those. But that's also a great way that I hope to, we'll be putting some focus on some areas we think are strategic for the project. And then the last way in terms of following what's next is to look at the releases. We have a nice and well-documented release cycle. Every April we have a new current, same with every October, which is why we're having 17. And then every October, we also promote the past current to an LTS, so that's every even. And so we have a very predictable release schedule. And how that can help you figure out what's going on is that for every release, there's a very nice change log, and that change log has a set of notable changes as well as the individual commits. And it's often good to look at the releases that are coming out, say an existing LTS line. You can look at the notable changes, and you'll know and see a number of the things that are coming up in a future release. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but a lot of the changes we make aren't saved or reserved until the next major. They flow back into the current. So you can actually get a good feel for what's coming down the pipe in terms of the interesting changes by looking at the releases that are going out month to month. So that's a little bit about how to follow what's next yourself. Next, I want to talk about Next 10. So this is all about strategic directions for the next 10 years of Node.js. We had a really successful first 10 years, and we want to make sure that the following 10 years is just as successful. And actually, this is a fairly long-term effort, so it's been a couple of years since we've kicked this off. But we're trying to answer questions like, what's critical for the future success? How is JavaScript going to evolve? We also found as we dove into that we needed to figure out some key questions like who are our stakeholders and what do they need, and document those things. So we started out, when we looked at it, everybody wants to jump into what are the technical priorities, and let's talk about technology things. But we really found we need to sort of step back a little bit and look at a few things before we could make some good decisions or have some good discussions about what would be important in terms of those technical priorities. So the first thing we looked at was actually the project's technical values and the priorities of those values, because there's been some fundamental values that kind of guided the project and I think have contributed to that success over the first 10 or 12 years. And it was important for us to sort of capture those, not that they won't change, they'll likely change over time, but we wanted to have those as a good understanding to sort of provide some guideposts for people who, if you're making larger contributions to the project, what should you align with to sort of, align with the values of the project. And so, we came up with these technical priorities, technical values and the relative priorities. And, As you can see, developer experience has always been near the top. We value stability, which you can see through our LTS cycles. Things like the operational quality, so security and diagnostics are important. We, of course, value our maintainer experience. We've always been fairly focused on bringing in new maintainers, and so we want to have a good experience for that. And then, of course, we want to have up-to-date technologies and APIs, and you can go and read a little bit more in details of what we wrote down for each of those. Having captured the values, we then said, well, okay, we should capture the constituencies. So who is it that are the users of Node.js and the people who have a stake in the future success? Because that's important in terms of understanding how the technical priorities might factor into that. So we came up with a good list of constituencies. Anybody from direct end users to security practitioners, and a whole number in between. The contributors, package authors, application developers, and the interesting thing I found is that we actually put this list together. We did a survey, and that helped us actually surface a few more that, in our brainstorming, we haven't found out. So we now have a good list of who should we be thinking about when we're thinking about what the priorities should be. Having understood the constituencies, we're then okay, well, what are the needs of those constituencies? So what should we keep in mind in terms, because not everybody is going to need the same thing. So what does each of those constituencies need? And we put together a very good table that shows the key needs that we think are out there, and then the mapping to which constituencies have those needs. And again, it's too big a list to fit on this page. You can go to the repo to take a look at that. But again, this fits and gives us our sort of foundation that we can start to reason about what are the key technical priorities going to be going forward to ensure success, for the key constituencies, addressing their needs. And now we're ready to start looking at the technical priorities. And so we actually had a mini summit not too long ago where we brought together, the people who are interested and a number of people from across the project. And we came up with the current technical priorities. Now, I think these will change over time, and it depends as well in terms of some may need more focus or less focus. It doesn't say that there aren't other priorities, but these were sort of the top ones that we think we should be thinking about as a project today to make sure we're successful going forward. They include some key things that have already been ongoing. So things like ESM, we've had a team who's been focused on bringing ESM to Node for quite a number of years. They include some things that we're already doing quite a good job on. So, the support for features from the latest ECMAScript specs. We have Michael Zasso, who works diligently to get us onto and keep us on the latest versions of V8, and through that we get new versions of the JavaScript language. We actually keep up quite well on that. There's other ones, there was a very interesting talk about TypeScript earlier in the schedule. And that's one where, again, it's recognized that TypeScript is important, not that everybody will be using TypeScript, but there is an important subset of our constituents who want to use types. So whether it's TypeScript or some other mechanism, we need to think about how we support the use of suitable types. And that's an area where I think, as a project, we could spend a little bit more time to come up with, well, what is our strategy on that front? It doesn't mean that we'll necessarily do X, Y, or Z, but we should think through and have a strategy for what we think we should do. And that could range from, well, we don't need to do anything to, yes, we should be doing some things. And then that'll help us provide some focus on that. So we're now at the point where we have, the initial set of priorities. We're actually, it's an open PR that we're working through and having some discussions. We hope to get that landed, and then we can sort of delve into each of those individually as we go forward. So Mike, always pitch getting people involved, and because we really need the input. So for example, we had a survey, and it was great to get the input from the broader ecosystem on that survey because it helped us flesh out a number of those first steps. So you can always join the effort. We can use more people's ideas and input. You can participate in any future surveys that we have. You can help by supporting those key initiatives. And my pitch is really, let's pitch in together and make sure the next 10 years is just as successful as the first 10. So now let's move on to taking a look at what's new and interesting. I often say major release is boring. Well, why is that? That's because the Node project works hard to flow changes even into the LTS releases, but certainly into the current releases at a pretty aggressive rate. So Semver minors, they'll move back. And so you can start using new features, and Semver minors are the interesting ones because that's where we add new features, functions. And majors, we're very cautious. Even though a major can introduce some breaking changes, we try to minimize those. And so really there's not often a lot of excitement when you come to the major. But in my mind, there's still a great time to talk about, promote, and celebrate all the stuff that we've gotten in to the platform and into Node over the releases, even though maybe they went into some of the Semver minor releases. And it's also a great time to talk about the promotion to LTS, which 16 goes out next week, because that's when you'll get an LTS release which has a number of those features which you can now take advantage of in something that at least I would recommend for production. So let's dive into some of the interesting things and the new features, because that's what lots of people are often interested about. So the first thing is we're always addressing platform support, shifting the minimum platforms based on what's end of life or not end of life. But one of the things that people have been excited about recently is the macOS M1 support. And 16.x will be the first LTS release that includes M1 support as an LTS release. We introduced it in 16, and this is one of those cases though where I still think it's something interesting. As we move to an LTS release, it's the first time that you're able to use it there. Another one coming in 17 is actually OpenSSL 3. We've been waiting for quite a number of years for OpenSSL 3. The impact of not having OpenSSL 3 is we haven't been able to support FIPS sort of root in the community. Some distros like the Red Hat RHEL distro has supported FIPS, and some other Linux distros have, but being able to do it from the community binaries hasn't been an option. So it's quite exciting to get OpenSSL 3. It has a nice provider model, which I think will actually help support, not only FIPS, but hardware acceleration tools and components much more easily. So it's great. The biggest impact will be things, it was meant to be fairly non-breaking, in terms of being able to use the APIs. There may be some tweaks you need to make in add-ons, but it shouldn't be a huge deal. The bigger effect will be on the impact of applications or modules that use legacy modules. Every time typically new versions of OpenSSL or crypto libraries, they're always sort of turning down the ability to use older, weaker algorithms, and same goes for key sizes. So OpenSSL 3 by default will remove a number of legacy algorithms with smaller key sizes and algorithms that are thought to be insecure. And in fact, we found actually a little bit late in the cycle that, the default provider may not be in our initial 17.0.0 release. We're still working on that, but that so that may actually cause some applications or modules to not be able to run because they're missing those algorithms. We are seeing if we can add that back in as a stopgap, but it is a good way to flesh out that you want to start removing your use of those algorithms anyway, and it will sort of push it. If you want to read more about OpenSSL, there's a great blog post that will talk about some of the details and stuff like that. The next thing that's interesting to mention in terms of what's new is promise-based APIs. As we saw before, it's one of the strategic initiatives for the project. And it's nice to see we've been making progress over the different releases. Node.js 17 brings us promise-fied API for readline. 16 going LTS next week brings us timers. And Stream was in 15, FS was in 14. So we continue to make consistent progress over time on those promise-based APIs. And just as an example, this is the one that's coming in 16, where I can use set timeout with a wait, and I don't need to have sort of a callback, and I can wait for something to happen much more easily. And readline provides a similar promise-fied API as well. So it's nice to see progress on that front. Another one coming in 17 is that we've added the version of Node to unhandled exceptions in the stack trace that's printed out. This is nice because if you've ever supported, customers who are using Node.js, and that's one of the mandates of our team is we support customers who are using Node.js on RHEL and in the UBI containers. One of the first questions you often have is like, what version of Node.js are you using? And this will short circuit that cycle quite often, because often you get like, here's my stack, my unhandled stack trace, and you'll be able to see, oh, I can see exactly what version that is. Of course, this is sort of a minor breaking change. It could cause, if you're parsing the exact format of stack traces, might get you into some trouble. There's no real guarantee that those won't change anyway. But of course, we want to minimize the impact to anybody. So there is a command line option where you could turn that off if you absolutely need to as a transition. One which has already made it into 16, but I think is really interesting and important to talk about is async local storage. It was stable as of 16.4.0, but with the promotion to LTS, we'll have an LTS version of Node where you can use a stable version of the async local storage. And it's really important for us to be able to do transaction tracing across microservices. So if I get a request, HTTP request in, I can take the transaction ID and pass it off to a request to the database. Other languages which are more thread-based, so things like C or Java that have, typically one thread per sort of thread of execution, they can just stash information in a thread local or something like that. With an async-based runtime like Node.js, that's always been more difficult, but async local storage brings the same capability to basically say, for this async thread of execution, I want to stash some information, be able to easily pull it out without having to pass it through all the async calls and so forth. And there's a talk later on by Stephen Boulanger, who's been doing a lot of great work on this front to make it more efficient and to help get this working well behind the scenes. So that's an important one to call out. I don't have enough time to go through this example, but this is a great example to see why it's so useful. How it's better than just trying to pass parameters through all of the async flow, which isn't even possible sometimes if you're using third-party libraries, and why it's different than just using like a global, because it'll show you that you get the wrong value if you get a global for the different async flows. So if you sort of for some homework, you can go check out this example and convince yourself that what I'm saying is right. ECMAScript modules are not necessarily new in 16 or 17, but they are worth mentioning in that constant sort of evolution in terms of bringing that support into the language. And in particular, there's lots of good work going on, which is still experimental. So there's some good work going on the loaders front that will help us with actually the APM side of things, and picking up some of the things like the JSON modules, picking up some capability we've come to expect when we're using the regular require, and then some newer things like WASM as well, making it easier to consume WASM. So it's important to sort of keep up and mention that there's still a lot of work going on the ES6 side to improve and to bring in and make that a more complete implementation within Node. As we mentioned before, we do a pretty good job of keeping up with V8. So we have a new version of V8 in Node 17. And some of the interesting things that, we can see, one of them that I particularly like is the error cause. It's along the lines of what I think is very important in terms of diagnostics. And it helps you sort of nest errors within each other, which is a very useful thing to be able to do. There's been a long time discussion about package managers and how do we make it easier for more package managers to be used easily. And it's experimental, but in Node 17, there's an experimental implementation of CorePack, and that lets you actually, by just doing the CorePack enable, you can then use additional yarn and PNPM just like you can with NPM as if it's bundled in. NPM is still bundled in, so nothing changes there. But this lets you more easily use some other package managers without having to actually install them yourself. CorePack handles installing them for you behind the scenes. There is some other experimental work, which I will just quickly go over because I think I'm used most of my time. But things like web streams, we have a raw API, and we're working on integrating other APIs. And then I just like to always mention source maps because, again, for diagnostics, and we did have there was a discussion on TypeScript. Sometimes the code you're running isn't the same as the code that you're actually written. And source maps let you map back the stack traces you get to the code you wrote. So that's really important. And, it can basically take code which, if you look at the stack trace here, you're wondering that just doesn't map back to the code that I've written. Whereas once you have stack source maps, you end up getting the stack traces, and you can map back to code that you expected, which is really important when you're trying to figure out what's going on. So just to review, that was some of the things that are interesting. Gave you a quick update on how to figure out and follow what's next yourself. Introduced you to the Next 10 effort, which is key initiative to figure out and document and put some focus on things we think are key for the success of Node.js going forward. And then I gave you a quick look at what's new, interesting in the 17, 16, and other recent features that have been going into the Node project. So thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Michael. That was really, really interesting and very, very useful. I particularly love the idea of having the version in the stack trace, the Node version in the stack trace. I've written it down because that's going to save so many people so much time. Just a little thing like that just makes such a big difference. So thanks ever so much for that. What's your personal favorite new feature in the new Node.js version?
Certainly, I think I'd call out two things. One, OpenSSL is a big thing. I think the OpenSSL 3 and the providers is going to open up that being able to more easily, handle FIPS, which is important to a good set of customers, as well as things like crypto accelerators and hardware accelerators. So I'm looking forward to that. The other one is, as I mentioned, async local storage. Diagnostics is really important, and especially with cloud native deployments, often very microservice based, lots of little microservices all working together, deployed in Kubernetes. It'll be really important to be able to do that transaction tracing across the whole thread of what makes up your customer request, all the way through these different microservices and then back out to give them the response. And so async local storage, in my mind, is one of the key things. There were modules that helped you do that before, but having it baked into the Node.js runtime itself, I think will help adoption across modules and make the overall story much stronger on that front.
Cool. And what do you think was the most interesting part of the feedback from the Next 10 survey?
What I found really interesting there is, even though we brought together a number of people who really had to have a good perspective and are very active in the project, there were some areas that we overlooked, and both from the constituencies and the core the needs of those constituencies, the feedback helped us build out and fill in some gaps that we'd had in that we sort of everybody has kind of the area they work in, and that helped to make sure that we so for example, I don't work in education so much, but it was when somebody in the comments was like, well, what we need to make sure that we have good coverage and consider education as a constituent. It was like, yeah, well, of course, that makes sense. And so it was interesting that feedback could help, how it just reinforced how important it is to get broader feedback to make sure you have a complete picture and sort of get all the different views into what you're doing.
Okay, brilliant. And we've got a comment from Matteo Lande here saying he's really looking forward to seeing the async local storage being used more and more as well. So it's a very popular feature. So thank you very much for that, Michael, and thank you very much for your talk. So,
thank you.
There he goes.